Daniel Cole had mastered silence. It was easier than speaking, easier than pretending he cared, easier than feeling anything at all. His world was built on numbers, contracts, deadlines, and the cold certainty that people disappointed you the moment you let them close. He had learned that lesson too well, too early, from the one person he thought would never betray him. His fiancée, 5 years ago, had left him on the morning of their wedding with nothing more than a text message that read, "I can't marry a man who cares more about the world than me." It wasn't true then, and it certainly wasn't true now, because whatever part of him once cared for the world had died the moment she walked away. And Daniel Cole, CEO of Cole Global, had let it die without a fight. The town knew him only as the man who moved like winter, quiet, cold, untouched. Employees avoided his eyes, board members feared his silence more than his anger, and investors trusted him because he was a machine, a man incapable of distractions, weaknesses, or emotional error. At 36, he was the youngest self-made billionaire in the state. But he ate dinner alone, slept alone, lived in a home large enough to echo, and never once noticed the lack of laughter in the hallways. He'd locked every door inside himself and thrown away the keys. Until the night he saw her. A flicker on a screen he hadn't meant to look at. A news segment playing in his hotel suite while he typed emails, ignored meals, and tried to pretend exhaustion wasn't gnawing at the edges of his mind. The TV had been background noise, until the camera landed on her face. A woman standing outside a courthouse, surrounded by reporters, flashes, microphones shoved toward her as if the world wanted to eat her alive. She wore no makeup. Her hair was unstyled, messy from the wind. But her eyes held a grief so raw, so unguarded, that for the first time in years Daniel's fingers stilled above his keyboard. Mia Hart. The actress the world had loved, until it didn't. She had been on every magazine cover, every talk show, every billboard, America's sweetheart, the rising star with a smile that made strangers believe in happy endings again. And then overnight everything she had was ripped away. A scandal, one she insisted was false, had destroyed her career, her reputation, her name. Producers dropped her. Studios deleted her scenes, her fans turned on her. Even her closest friends vanished like smoke. He watched her on the TV as she tried to smile for the cameras, tried to pretend she was strong, tried to keep her hands from shaking. But Daniel saw everything. The tension in her jaw, the way her throat bobbed when she swallowed down tears, the redness at the corners of her eyes that said she hadn't slept in days. Her voice trembled only once when a reporter shouted, "Do you admit guilt?" And instead of answering, she whispered a single sentence into the noise, "I just wish someone believed me." Daniel didn't know why that sentence cleaved through him like a blade. He didn't know why his chest tightened, why his throat felt thick, why something inside him, the part he thought was long dead, reacted to the tremble in her voice as if it recognized its own reflection. Betrayal was the one thing he understood better than success, better than numbers, better than himself. And he could see it on her like bruises the world refused to acknowledge. She wasn't lying. He could feel it in his bones. He didn't believe in destiny, but destiny didn't care. 3 weeks later, she walked into his life in a way even he couldn't have predicted. The annual Hope for Tomorrow fundraising gala was the one event he couldn't avoid. Too much press, too many eyes, too many investors who expected him to show up in a tailored suit and pretend he wasn't fundamentally allergic to socializing. Normally he'd stay for 30 minutes, nod politely, write a check, and leave before someone tried to engage him in small talk. But that night, as chandeliers glittered above the ballroom and champagne glasses clinked around him, Daniel froze the moment he saw her step onto the stage. Mia Hart. Her first public appearance since the scandal. Her black gown sparkled under the lights, elegant and graceful, but her eyes still carried the same exhaustion he'd seen on the courthouse steps. She held the microphone with both hands as if afraid it might slip. The murmurs started immediately. Whispers, judgment, resentment. Some people folded their arms, some rolled their eyes, some smirked. He hated all of them in an instant. She took a shaky breath and began to speak. "I know I'm not the person many of you expected to see here tonight," she said. "I know some of you didn't want me on this stage at all." A tense ripple moved through the audience. Daniel's jaw clenched. She continued, voice soft but steady. "But I'm here because this cause matters to me, and no matter what the world chooses to believe about me, I still believe in doing the right thing." Cameras flashed. People whispered harsher things. Someone muttered loudly, "Unbelievable." Daniel stood up. He didn't even know he was doing it until he was already moving, already crossing the ballroom, already ignoring the startled looks from donors and executives who had never seen him break the silent, untouchable persona he'd built. Mia's eyes widened when she saw him walking straight toward the stage. She paused mid-sentence. The audience turned. The room fell silent. Daniel took the stairs up to the stage and came to stand beside her, facing the crowd like he was facing down a firing squad. He didn't touch the microphone, he didn't need to. His voice carried through the hall with quiet authority. "She's here because I invited her." A collective gasp. "Cole Global is donating $5 million tonight," he continued, "and I personally requested that Miss Hart present the keynote. I stand by that decision." Mia stared at him, stunned. He didn't look at her because if he did, he wasn't sure what he might feel. The audience shifted uncomfortably, but no one challenged him, no one dared. Daniel leaned slightly toward her, his voice low enough only she could hear. "Finish your speech." It wasn't an order, it was permission. Her eyes softened, she swallowed, and she finished. It was the first time in 5 years that Daniel Cole felt alive, and the first time in months that Mia Hart felt seen. After the event, she found him standing alone on the terrace, the city lights reflecting in the glass walls behind him. He didn't turn when she approached, but he spoke quietly. "You handled them well," she exhaled a shaky laugh. "You mean I didn't faint? Trust me, that was a real possibility." He glanced at her, just long enough to see the vulnerability she tried to mask with humor. "The world was unfair to you," she blinked, once, twice. "Why do you care?" "I don't," he said automatically, a lie so fragile even he felt it crack. She stepped closer, studying him with careful curiosity. Most people feared him. She didn't, maybe because she'd already lost everything and had nothing left to be afraid of. Maybe because she saw through the armor he'd worn so long he'd forgotten it was there. "You believed me," she whispered. "Back there on that stage. You didn't even know me." "I didn't have to," he replied. Their eyes held, and something shifted, not loudly, not dramatically, just a faint, undeniable spark in two people who had forgotten what sparks felt like. Their worlds collided that night, not with fire but with recognition. A man who trusted no one and a woman the world no longer trusted, somehow finding something true in each other. They met again, then almost every day. Coffee turned into conversations. Conversations turned into confessions. Confessions turned into something both of them feared naming. For Daniel, Mia wasn't noise, she was quiet in a way that felt like breath. She didn't want his money, his power, or his reputation. She wanted to understand him. And he who'd closed every door inside himself found his hands reaching for the keys he'd thrown away. For Mia, Daniel wasn't pity, he was safety. Not the kind that sheltered her from the world, but the kind that made her strong enough to face it again. He defended her without needing credit. He believed her without needing proof. He saw her without needing her to perform for him, and slowly she began to heal. But love, real love, doesn't arrive without a cost. And just when they began to trust the fragile hope blooming between them, the world returned to destroy it. The scandal resurfaced, worse than before. This time with new evidence, evidence powerful enough to convince even Daniel's board members that Mia was a liability. Investors threatened to pull out. Cole Global's stock wavered. Executives insisted Mia was manipulating him. The same old whispers returned, "She's using you. She's lying. She's dangerous." Daniel was faced with a choice, his company or her, the woman who had taught his heart to beat again. And Mia made that choice for him. One night, standing outside his penthouse, tears streaking down her face as she whispered, "I can't let you lose everything because of me." She left. He broke, and the world celebrated. The night Mia left, the city felt too quiet. Daniel stood in the doorway long after the elevator doors had closed, his hands still on the frame, as if he could pull time backward by refusing to move. Her scent lingered in the hallway, jasmine and rain, and it hurt to breathe it in. The words she'd left behind echoed in his skull like a cruel loop. "I can't let you lose everything because of me." It was almost funny if anything in him remembered how to laugh. She thought he was afraid of losing everything. She didn't understand that he already had. He moved through the penthouse in a daze. Her mug sat on the counter, lipstick faintly staining the rim. One of her scripts lay open on the coffee table, dog-eared, notes scribbled in the margins in her messy handwriting. A throw blanket she loved was draped where she always curled up and kicked off her shoes while ranting about directors who didn't know the difference between genuine emotion and forced drama. Everything looked the same. Nothing was. He picked up the script, fingers brushing the pages she'd touched. The ache in his chest sharpened, became something almost physical. He pressed the script against his sternum like pressure could hold him together. For 5 years he'd lived like a ghost. She had brought him back to life. And now she was gone. His phone buzzed on the table. He didn't look at it. It buzzed again and again, persistent, insistent. Not her, she'd left her phone on silent half the time. This was the rhythm of someone who needed decisions, signatures, leadership, reality. He forced himself to answer. "Cole," he said, his voice sounding rough, unfamiliar. "We have a problem," his CFO Marcus said without preamble. "Investors are panicking. The new article hit an hour ago. Legal wants you in first thing in the morning. They're saying," he hesitated, "they're saying you need to distance the company from her." Immediately, Mia, her name had become radioactive overnight. The latest piece wasn't just gossip, it was a full-scale character assassination. New evidence showed payments from her account to an anonymous source tied to one of the leaked scripts responsible for a multi-million-dollar loss. Never mind that nothing about the evidence made sense. Never mind that she'd already denied everything in sworn statements. The world didn't care what was true, the world cared what was entertaining. "Let them panic," Daniel said flatly. "Daniel," I said, "let them panic." His jaw tightened. "I'm not releasing a statement tonight." "Tomorrow, then, we need something." He hung up. The city outside glittered like a promise he no longer believed in. He walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows and stared down at the streets, the cars, the anonymous lives moving on without him. Somewhere out there she was alone, and he'd let her leave. "Because you didn't stop her," a cruel part of him whispered. "Because you shut down like you always do, and you let the one thing that matters walk away." He realized then that he had a choice to make. Not between her and the company, between who he'd been and who he wanted to be. For years he had survived by not feeling, by building walls instead of bridges. By choosing control over connection, it had kept him safe. It had also kept him empty. Mia had walked straight into his emptiness and lit a match. He couldn't go back to the dark, not now that he knew what warmth felt like. Daniel turned away from the glass and headed for his office. Not the sleek, polished one downtown, but the smaller, more intimate room off his bedroom where he kept what he didn't share with anyone else. Old files, old contacts. Old instincts he'd learned as a hungry kid with nothing but a brain sharp enough to carve his way out of poverty. People thought he'd become a billionaire because he was ruthless. They never understood he was observant. He saw patterns. In markets, in people, in lies. He pulled up the evidence articles, his laptop screen lighting his features in cold blue. Line by line, he studied every claim, payment dates, account numbers, IP logs, images, quotes. Social media timelines. He cross-referenced, compared, and dissected until his eyes burned. Where most people saw a damning narrative, he saw something else. A rhythm that was off. An angle that was too convenient. A timing that was too perfect. Somebody wanted her destroyed, and they'd made one mistake. They'd put themselves on his radar, hours bled together. The night deepened. Dawn's first gray light crept onto the horizon, and still he worked. By the time his alarm, set every day for his morning run, startled to life, he'd already traced 3 key pieces back to a PR firm known for crisis campaigns that weren't always ethical. He'd never used them. But he knew who had, his biggest rival, Grayson Sharp. The man who'd tried and failed to buy Cole Global 3 years ago, the man who believed everything and everyone was for sale. The man whose production company had lost millions when Mia refused to sleep with a powerful director he championed. Something Daniel only found buried in gossip threads and anonymous posts, never spoken aloud in interviews. No one had listened when she said, "He hurt me." They'd listened when he said, "She's difficult." Daniel's hand curled slowly into a fist. He could almost feel the old version of himself, the disconnected strategist, the calculating CEO, rising to the surface. But this time the cold focus had a purpose beyond numbers. This time he wasn't protecting a company. He was fighting for a woman. He showered, dressed, and drove downtown in silence. No music, no news. Just the hum of the engine and the steady drum of his heartbeat pounding out a rhythm that sounded suspiciously like resolve. At Cole Global, the atmosphere was more tense than usual. Assistants skirted around him with wide eyes. Executives watched him through glass walls as he passed, like he was a storm they were waiting to see hit land. In the boardroom, 12 seats were filled and waiting. Marcus. Legal, PR, 2 major investors, faces tight. "Daniel," Marcus began carefully as he entered, "we need to talk strategy." "We do," Daniel agreed. "First, we recommend a statement expressing sympathy but clarifying that neither you nor Cole Global had any involvement with Miss Hart's situation." "No," Daniel said. A beat of startled silence. The head of PR cleared her throat. "With respect, Mr. Cole, this is damage control. We need to formally distance the brand from." "I'm not distancing myself from her." "Your personal life is complicating." "My personal life," he cut in, his voice deadly calm, "is not what's under attack here. The truth is, And if this company wants to stand for something more than profit margins, we're not going to fold every time the media decides someone's the villain of the week. One of the investors leaned forward. With all due respect, Daniel, that villain of the week could cost us millions. We can't risk our stock price on a woman whose image is. Careful, Daniel said softly, his eyes locking onto the man's. The last time someone underestimated a woman because of what the media said, they lost a company to me in under 6 months. Marcus almost smiled despite himself. The investor swallowed and sat back. Legal spoke up next, voice precise. Even if she's innocent, proving it will take time. Until then, the association is risky. You have responsibilities to shareholders. I know my responsibilities, Daniel said. Which is why I'm going to fulfill them. You want the company protected? Fine, I'll do that, but I'm not sacrificing her to do it. He reached into his folder and slid printed pages onto the table. This is a preliminary trace on the so-called evidence. It leads back to a PR firm used by Sharp International. Grayson Sharp has motive, history, and enough ego to think he can manufacture reality. His gaze hardened. I'm not going to let that stand. PR's eyes widened as she skimmed the pages. If this is accurate, it is, he said without doubt. I want a private team assigned to this, off the books. We find the original data, the real transactions, the source of the leaks, and when we do, we're not just clearing Mia's name. We're exposing whoever did this, Marcus finished quietly. Daniel nodded once. The room buzzed with tension, fear, reluctant respect. This was not the detached CEO they were used to. This was a man with something to lose, and something he refused to let go of. Until further notice, he continued, no one at this company speaks about Mia Hart to the press without my explicit approval. We are not issuing any distancing statements. We are not feeding the narrative. Understood, a murmur of assent. Meeting adjourned. He walked out with his decision made. Now he just needed to find her. It took him 3 days. She turned off her phone, deactivated her social media, disappeared from her agent's radar. Paparazzi speculated she'd gone to some exotic retreat, some whispery rehab, some dramatic cliffside villa where actresses went to find themselves. They were all wrong. He found her where no one thought to look, back home. Not the mansion she'd bought at the height of her fame. Not the luxury high-rise downtown. A modest, weathered house in a quiet neighborhood 2 hours outside the city, her childhood home. The place she'd once mentioned in passing, late one night, curled up on his couch with her feet tucked under her and her voice growing soft as she talked about running barefoot in the yard. Her mom hanging laundry on the line, the smell of pancakes and old wood and safety. My whole life, she'd said that night, I thought if I worked hard enough I could buy that feeling back. Now he understood why she'd come here. The yard was overgrown, paint peeled from the porch railings, the swing set in the back sagged. His sleek car looked almost apologetic as it pulled up to the curb, as if it knew it didn't belong. He stepped out, heart pounding for the first time in years for a reason that had nothing to do with risk or markets. He walked up the path, past the memories she'd once painted for him with words, and knocked on the faded blue door. Nothing. He waited, knocked again. Silence. He almost turned away, but something made him try the handle. It gave. The air inside the house was cool, carrying the faint scent of dust and lemon cleaner. Sunlight filtered through thin curtains, striping the worn hardwood floor. In the living room, an old couch sagged under the weight of a single figure curled into itself. Mia, her hair was messy, tangled. She wore an oversized sweater and leggings, her feet bare, one hand gripping a throw pillow to her chest. The TV flickered quietly in front of her, some old black-and-white movie playing, but her eyes weren't really watching. They were dull in a way he'd never seen before. His heart broke a little at the sight. "Hi," he said softly, her head snapped up. For a moment she just stared, as if he were a hallucination conjured by loneliness. Her eyes reddened, tears instantly burning at the edges. "No," she whispered, you can't be here." "Clearly I can," he said gently, stepping inside and closing the door behind him. "You really should lock this." She stood abruptly, the pillow falling to the floor. "Daniel, you need to leave. If anyone sees you here, if anyone sees me here," he cut in, "they'll assume what's already true." "What's that?" she demanded, voice breaking. "That I care about you." The words hung between them like something dangerous and beautiful. She flinched like he'd struck her. "Don't," she whispered. "Please don't say things like that right now. You saw what happened, you saw what they did. You could lose everything, your company, your investors. Stop deciding what I'm willing to lose," he said quietly, but there was steel in his tone. "You left because you thought you were protecting me. You didn't even give me the chance to decide for myself." Her chin trembled. You think this is easy for me, watching them talk about you like you're some stupid CEO blinded by a pretty face, hearing people say I'm using you. That I'm dragging you down. I couldn't breathe, Daniel. I still can't. I thought if I took myself out of the equation, they'd leave you alone. And did they? He asked. She hesitated. No, she admitted brokenly. They just turned you into part of the story. He stepped closer, slow, giving her space to pull back if she wanted. She didn't. She just stood there, shoulders shaking, eyes glossy. I've lived with people's opinions my whole life, he said. They thought I'd fail when I was a kid from nowhere. They thought I'd crash when I started my own company. They thought I'd burn out when I became CEO. I stopped letting them write my story a long time ago. His gaze softened. I'm not going to let them write yours. It's too late, she whispered. No, he said, it isn't, she laughed bitterly. There's proof, remember, screenshots, statements, transactions, the internet never forgets. Maybe not, he agreed. But neither do I, and I remember every time you told me the truth when it would have been easier to lie. Every time you showed up even when people said you shouldn't. Every time you looked me in the eye and trusted I wouldn't hurt you. Her breath hitched. And I left. Yes, he said honestly, you did. Tears spilled over now, hot tracks down her cheeks. Because I was scared, she choked. Not just of what they'd do to you, but of what it meant that you believed in me when nobody else did. She looked at him, raw and open. I don't know how to trust that. I don't know how to believe that someone like you could care. He closed the distance between them. Gently, he reached up and cupped her face, his thumbs brushing away her tears. She stiffened at first, then leaned into his touch like she'd been starved for it. Then let me show you, he said. Not in grand speeches or staged photos, in the way I stand beside you when it costs me something. In the way I fight for your name when it would be easier to let it drown. In the way I stay when you push me away. You shouldn't, she whispered. Maybe not, he said. But I'm done making decisions based solely on what I should do. For the first time in a long time, I'm going to do what I want to do. And what's that? She asked, voice barely audible. He took a breath, feeling the truth settle into his bones like it had been waiting there for years. I want to clear your name, he said. I want to drag the truth into the light, no matter who burns from it. I want to walk into a room with you and not care who whispers. I want you to act again. I want you to smile without flinching, to laugh without looking over your shoulder. And I want, his voice softened. I want a life that isn't so damn empty. Silence. The old movie flickered in the background, forgotten. Dust motes floated in the sunbeams a few feet away, glittering like tiny stars. Mia closed her eyes. When she opened them again, something had changed. The fear was still there, but so was something else, something braver. Something that looked like the first step out of a cage. What do you need me to do? She asked. Tell me everything, he said. From the first moment the director crossed a line, to the first rumor, to the first time someone asked you to let it go for the sake of your career. No more protecting people who never protected you. Her jaw tightened, she nodded, and then she told him. The story spilled out of her in waves, the inappropriate comments brushed off as jokes. The accidental touches. The warnings from her agent. The night she finally said no. How shortly after roles started disappearing, calls stopped coming, scripts vanished. How she'd been cornered in an office and told that if she made trouble, she'd never work again. How the leak of the confidential script they blamed her for had been the final blow that took her from difficult to dangerous. How did the money get in your account? He asked, eyes sharp. I don't know, she said, frustration in her tone. I didn't authorize anything. My manager had my banking details for years, but he swears he never. Daniel's eyes narrowed. Your manager. The one who dropped you as soon as the scandal broke. Yes. Has anyone looked into his finances? He asked. Not that I know of, she said. The studio's investigation focused on me. I was the easy target. He smiled, but it wasn't kind. Then it's time to make someone else the target. The next weeks were a blur of motion. Daniel moved like a man possessed. He hired independent forensic analysts, dug into bank records, subpoenaed under-the-table communications, and quietly leaned on every contact he'd cultivated in a decade at the top. He didn't storm into studios or yell into microphones. That wasn't his style. Instead, he pulled at threads. And one by one, they began to unravel. A transfer from the PR firm's shell account to Mia's manager. A series of late-night calls between the manager and a mid-level executive at Sharp International. A coincidental promotion for that executive 3 months after the scandal broke. An anonymous bonus wired to a director's consultancy. The picture came into focus. They'd framed her. They'd used her account, her proximity to the script, her position as an emotional actress to make the story believable. The world was all too willing to believe a woman was unstable, vindictive, manipulative. No one had expected anyone to dig beyond the surface. No one had expected her to have someone like Daniel. In those weeks, he and Mia grew closer in ways neither of them had anticipated. She stayed part-time at the old house, part-time in his penthouse, moving between the two like someone learning how to walk in two worlds without apologizing. Some nights he found her on his balcony, wrapped in a blanket, staring out over the city. "Do you ever miss it?" she asked once, not turning as he stepped beside her. "Miss what?" he asked. "The version of yourself before all of this. Before money, before your fiancé left, before your heart turned into whatever it was when I met you." A faint smile tugged at her lips, teasing but not cruel. He considered. "No," he said honestly, "I don't miss him. He was always waiting for something, approval, security, proof he deserved his place. I don't need that anymore." "What do you need?" she asked. He looked at her, really looked, at the way the wind tugged at her hair, at the faint lines of stress near her eyes that hadn't been there in her early photos, at the stubborn resilience in the way she stood upright despite the weight of a world that had tried to crush her. "You," he said simply. Her breath caught. She turned, searching his face for any hint of hesitation. There was none. "You mean that?" she whispered. "I don't say things I don't mean," he replied. She stepped closer until the space between them was a single breath. "Then you should know," she said softly, "that I need you too. Not because you're saving me, not because you're some CEO with resources, but because when you look at me, I feel like a person again, not a headline, not a scandal. Just Mia." He reached out, fingers brushing her jaw, tilting her face up. The city fell away. The noise, the lights, the judgments, they all blurred into nothing as he lowered his forehead to hers. "You're not just anything," he murmured. "You're the bravest person I know." She laughed, the sound watery but real. "You've led hostile takeovers. And yet," he said, "I've never seen anything as terrifying or courageous as you choosing to tell the truth when it cost you everything." The kiss, when it came, was not some explosive, cinematic moment meant to make audiences gasp. It was slow, gentle, two people learning the contours of each other's mouths like a language they'd always been meant to speak. His hand slid into her hair, her fingers curled in his shirt. The world spun quietly around them, and for a few seconds time itself seemed willing to pause. When they pulled back, foreheads still touching, both of them were breathing a little harder. "That was," she began. "Necessary," he finished. She smiled, really smiled, and the sight of it felt like sunrise after years of winter. But the world did not freeze just because they'd found each other. While they built something fragile and real, the storm outside grew louder. Rumors churned. Media outlets hinted at the CEO and the disgraced starlet. Sharp International started leaking carefully worded statements implying concern over Daniel's judgment. The studio remained silent, letting the court of public opinion do their dirty work. Daniel knew they needed more than suspicion. They needed proof. And then one night at 2:13 a.m., proof arrived. His phone buzzed on the nightstand. Next to him, Mia slept, her hand resting on his chest, fingers splayed like a promise. He hated to move, but the name on the screen jolted him fully awake. "Got it," the text from his lead investigator read. "You'll want to see this in person." 2 hours later, he sat in a dim conference room with a man who'd once traced international money laundering schemes and now worked almost exclusively in the shadows for clients like him. "We mirrored the manager's encrypted backups," the man said, sliding a laptop toward him. "There's a folder here, hidden behind 3 layers of misdirection, password protected. But the guy's not as clever as he thinks he is. Heart is only slightly better than password." The folder opened. Inside were emails, dozens of them, correspondence between the manager and Sharp's executive. Subject lines that made Daniel's pulse spike. "Ray, Project Starfall. Ray, narrative control. Ray, leak timing." He read them, every line, every implication. They laid out a strategy in chilling, clinical detail. Discredit the actress, leak the script, blame her, use her as an example to keep other troublesome women in line. The manager's cut was spelled out. The PR firm's role was referenced. The director's involvement, while never stated outright, was clearly understood. One email made his blood turn to ice. "Once the Heart girl's out of the way, we'll move forward with the Sharp Studios slate. Appreciate your help with Cole. If he's emotionally entangled, all the better, makes him easier to sideline." Daniel stared at the words, emotionally entangled. They thought caring made him weak. He closed the laptop with a steady hand. "They won't think that much longer," he said. He could have gone to the police quietly. Could have sent this to her lawyer and let the wheels of justice grind slowly, painfully forward. But the world hadn't destroyed her quietly. The world had torn her apart publicly. If they wanted real justice, they had to fight on the same battlefield, the court of public opinion. "I'm going to need a press conference," he told Marcus later that morning. Marcus blinked. "You hate press conferences." "I hate injustice more. You're really doing this." "Yes," he hesitated. "They'll come after you. They already are." "What about the company?" Daniel met his gaze. "There are different ways to lead, Mark. You can lead by fear, by greed, or by example." His expression hardened. "We're going to show them what it looks like when someone with power actually stands up." The date was set. Word spread like wildfire. Cole to address Hart scandal. Speculation exploded. Some said he'd announce their breakup. Some said he'd apologize for his association. Some predicted he'd resign. Mia watched the coverage with a knot in her stomach. "You don't have to do this," she told him the night before, sitting cross-legged on his bed, hair up in a messy knot, his shirt hanging off one shoulder. She looked like every soft, impossible dream he'd never allowed himself to have. "If you present this to the authorities, it'll come out eventually anyway. You don't need to put yourself front and center." "I'm not front and center," he said, sitting beside her. "You are, and that's the problem. They made you the story to hide the real one. I won't let them keep using your face as a smokescreen." She studied him, eyes searching. "You're risking everything you built." "So what?" he said simply. She blinked. "That's your life's work." "No," he answered softly. "You're my life's work now. The company is just what I do." Emotion surged in her eyes, too big to contain. "You can't say things like that to me," she whispered, voice thick. "Not when I'm already this far gone." "How far?" he asked, his voice just as low. She laughed wetly. "I love you, you idiot," she said. "Is that what you wanted to hear?" He froze. He'd suspected. He'd hoped. But hearing it plain and unadorned, no drama, no conditions, felt like someone had taken his heart, long wrapped in barbed wire, and finally cut it free. He swallowed. "Say it again." She rolled her eyes through her tears. "You're really going to make me be the emotionally vulnerable one twice?" "Yes," she sighed, then smiled, shaky but sincere. "I love you, Daniel, not the CEO, not the man on magazine covers. The stubborn, infuriatingly loyal man who showed up on my mother's old couch and refused to let me drown." His chest ached, but in the best way. "I love you too," he said quietly. "You're the first person I've said that to who didn't turn it into a weapon." She brushed her fingers over his cheek. "I won't." "I know," he said. The next day the world watched. The press conference was held in a spacious hall. Cameras lined up like soldiers, reporters clutching notebooks and phones, the hum of anticipation vibrating through the air. The front row was a minefield of critics, gossip bloggers, serious journalists, and people who'd built careers on tearing others down. Mia stood backstage, heart pounding against her ribs. She could see him from the wings, Daniel in a dark suit, tie perfectly knotted, expression calm. Not cold, not distant. Calm like a man who'd already made peace with whatever would happen next. "You ready?" he asked her quietly without turning, sensing her presence. "No," she admitted, "but I'm here." He smiled faintly. "That's enough." The moderator stepped up to the podium, introduced him. The room hushed. Daniel walked out, every camera turning toward him, flashes popping like lightning. He adjusted the microphone, looked out over the sea of faces, and for a moment he remembered all the times he'd avoided this exact situation. Then he thought of Mia standing alone outside a courthouse, voice trembling as she said, "I just wish someone believed me." He would not tremble. "Thank you for coming," he said, voice steady. "I know there's been a lot of speculation about my relationship with Mia Hart and the impact of recent allegations on Cole Global. I'm here today to address both." Reporters leaned forward. "First," he said, "I want to be absolutely clear. I have no intention of distancing myself from Mia." A ripple of shock. "I believe her," he continued. "Not because I'm blinded or biased, but because I've seen the evidence. Evidence that points not to her guilt, but to a deliberate, coordinated effort to destroy her reputation for profit and control." A murmur ran through the room. "Over the past weeks," he said, "I've hired independent investigators to trace the so-called payments and leaks tied to her name. What we found was a network of shell accounts, covert communications, and deliberate framing involving a PR firm, a studio executive, her former manager, and individuals at Sharp International." At the mention of Sharp, a visible reaction rippled through the press. This was bigger than a scandal. This was a war. "We've compiled emails, transaction records, and testimonies," he said, holding up a thick folder. "These documents outline an operation codenamed Project Starfall, designed to discredit Mia after she refused to comply with behavior expected of her by certain individuals in power." He didn't say refused to sleep with a director. He didn't need to. The dots connected themselves. These documents, he went on, have been turned over to the authorities. Legal action is being pursued, and I stand here not as a man protecting his girlfriend from gossip, but as a CEO and a human being refusing to let lies win just because they're loud. Hands shot up. Questions were shouted. Mr. Cole, are you implying Sharp International orchestrated the entire scandal? Did you say operation? Are you alleging a conspiracy? How long have you been involved with Miss Hart romantically? He held up a hand. One at a time, he said. Yes, I am stating that individuals associated with Sharp International, in concert with others, played a significant role in the fabrication and amplification of allegations against Mia Hart. Whether that is called a conspiracy is up to the legal system to decide. And your personal relationship, someone from a gossip outlet called, is she your girlfriend? He paused. He could lie, could deflect. He didn't. Yes, he said simply. I'm in a relationship with Mia. My feelings for her didn't create this evidence. They gave me the motivation to find it. Another wave of murmurs. A few impressed, a few skeptical, some outright hostile. Isn't that a conflict of interest? Someone challenged. It would be, he said, if I were asking you to take my word for it. I'm not. I'm asking you to look at the documents, follow the money, follow the timelines. Decide for yourselves whether the story you've been sold is the real one or just the one that was convenient. He opened the folder, placed copies of key documents on the front table where major outlets would get them first. You all wanted a story, he said. Here it is, not the fallen actress, not the foolish CEO, the system that profits off destroying people and expects no one to question it. Backstage, Mia watched with her hand over her mouth, tears streaming silently down her face. No one had ever stood up for her like that, not publicly, not loudly, not at a cost. The questions kept coming. Some tried to corner him, suggest he was doing this as a publicity stunt. He parried each one with calm facts. Every attempt to twist his words slid off the shield of evidence he'd brought. It wasn't perfect. Some would still doubt, some always would, but seeds were planted that day. And seeds given light had a way of growing. The coverage that followed was unlike anything she'd experienced before. For the first time in months, headlines included phrases like new evidence, possible framing, internal corruption. Commentators who'd mocked her began hedging their language. Old co-stars who'd stayed silent sent her tentative messages. If this is true, I'm so sorry. Most importantly, survivors, women and men who'd been brushed aside when they spoke up. They flooded her inbox with stories, with gratitude, with rage on her behalf. She sat on the floor of his living room one night, scrolling through messages, tears dripping onto her knees. I don't deserve this, she whispered. Daniel sat beside her, taking the phone gently from her hands. Yes, he said, you do. I'm just one person, she said. So are they, he replied. Sometimes it takes one person to stand in the fire so others know it's possible to survive it. Criminal investigations began. Lawyers circled. The director in question took a sudden leave of absence. The manager vanished into an undisclosed retreat. Sharp International issued a bland, careful statement denying involvement, but the stock market reacted to the smoke. And through it all, Mia and Daniel lived. Not in some grand, media-documented way, in small moments. Grocery shopping at odd hours to avoid cameras, arguing over which old movie to watch. Her dragging him to a small, local theater production because you need to see what acting looks like when there's no money involved. Him teaching her how to read a stock chart, laughing as she groaned and threw a cushion at his head. One evening, months later, they sat on the same old couch in her mother's house. She decided to renovate it instead of selling, to turn it into a place that belonged to her on her own terms. You know what the wildest part of all this is, she mused, sipping tea. That you still haven't learned to lock the front door, he teased. She shoved his shoulder lightly. No, the wildest part is if none of this had happened. If I hadn't been betrayed, framed, dragged, if the world hadn't turned its back on me, she looked at him, eyes soft, I never would have met you. His throat tightened. I would have kept working, she said, kept smiling for cameras. Kept ignoring the parts of me that were hurting because the work was everything. I would have burned out and called it success. She set her cup down. The worst thing that ever happened to me led me to the best thing that ever happened to me. How do you even process that? He took her hand, threading his fingers through hers. By not pretending the pain was worth it, he said. It wasn't, you deserved better, but you also deserve this, not as compensation. As a new chapter. You're getting philosophical, she said, smirking. Don't tell anyone, he replied. I have a reputation to maintain. As what? The Ice King who turned out to be a secret romantic, she teased. He arched a brow. Secret? She laughed, her head tipping back, the sound free. Later that year, the district attorney announced formal charges against several individuals involved in Project Starfall. Her name was cleared in an official statement. The studio issued a public apology, thin and delayed but still a crack in the wall. Offers trickled in again, indie directors, small studios, streaming projects. She turned most of them down, until one landed on her table that made her pause. "It's about a woman," she told Daniel, sitting on their shared couch in the penthouse now, the old and the new blending into a life they'd built together. She loses everything because she tells the truth, and then she meets someone who believes her, not because she's perfect, but because she's human. He watched her, recognizing pieces of their story in the synopsis. "You want to do it?" he asked. "I don't know," she admitted. "Part of me is scared it'll feel like exploiting what happened." "And the other part?" he asked. "The other part thinks maybe this is how I take it back, my career. My narrative, my face." She looked up at him. "What do you think?" "I think," he said softly, "that your story doesn't belong to the people who hurt you. It belongs to you. If you want to tell a version of it on your terms, I'll be in the front row," she smiled. "You'd better be. I might have to kiss someone on screen again someday. I'll need you there to remind me you're real." Jealousy flickered through him, irrational and sharp. He smirked. "As long as they know that when the director yells cut, you go home with me," she grinned. "Always." The movie was greenlit. It wasn't a blockbuster. It wasn't a massive studio tentpole. It was small, intimate, character-driven. The kind of film that relied not on explosions, but on quiet moments of truth. The kind of film that required everything she'd learned the hard way. On the first day of shooting, she stood on a modest set, lights glaring, crew bustling around her. For a second, old panic surged. The last time she'd been on a set, she'd walked off without knowing if she'd ever come back. Then she saw him, leaning against a wall just offset, arms crossed, a slight smile on his face. He didn't say anything, he didn't need to. "I'm here," his presence said. She took a breath. Hit her mark, spoke her first line, and this time when the camera captured her, it wasn't a girl desperate to prove she deserved to be there. It was a woman who knew she did. Months later, the film premiered at a small festival. They went, not expecting much beyond a polite reception. Instead, they got a standing ovation. Not for the scandal, not for the subtext, for the performance. For the story, people came up to her afterward, eyes bright, saying things like, "That felt real," and "Thank you for telling that story." Outside, in the cool night air, she turned to Daniel, cheeks flushed from praise and champagne and something like peace. "I think I'm okay," she said slowly, as if realizing it for the first time. He brushed a strand of hair behind her ear. "You're more than okay." "I'm happy," she said, sounding surprised. He smiled. "Get used to it." They walked down the sidewalk together, hand in hand, no longer hiding, no longer apologizing. Cameras snapped photos from across the street, but for once neither of them flinched. "What do you think they're saying about us now?" she mused. He shrugged. "Hopefully something incredibly boring, like CEO and actress spotted going for late-night fries." She laughed. "God, I'd love that. Just being boring." "We'll never be boring," he said. "Not with you around." She bumped her shoulder into his. "You shut your heart to everyone for years," she said. "You really weren't planning on letting anyone in ever again, were you?" "No," he admitted. "I thought caring was the problem." "And now?" she asked. He looked at her, the woman the world had betrayed and the woman who'd taught him how to live again. "Now I know," he said, "that the problem wasn't that I cared, it was that I cared about the wrong people." He squeezed her hand. "You're the right one." Her eyes softened, overflowing with love that no scandal, no lie, no campaign could erase. "You're the right one too," she whispered. Cars passed. The city buzzed. Life went on, indifferent and chaotic and loud. But in that small pocket of the world, on that unremarkable stretch of sidewalk beneath a flickering street lamp, two people who had every reason to stop believing in anything chose to believe anyway. In each other, in second chances. In a future not defined by the worst things that had happened to them, but by the choices they made after. The CEO who had shut his heart to everyone had found unexpected love in the actress the world betrayed. Not because fate demanded it, not because a script required it, but because when the noise grew too loud they listened to the quiet truth inside themselves. And this time they didn't walk away.